Chapter 1. The Battle for Zelfa Ridge. The Endless Conflict. The galaxy's outer rim was a lawless expanse of contested planets, shattered alliances, and unrelenting warfare. Among these fractured worlds was Vrander 7, a desolate and windswept planet where alien dynasties clashed over dwindling resources. The skies were perpetually gray, scarred by centuries of orbital bombardments, and the ground bore the scars of trench warfare waged between the native Vrandari clans and various mercenary factions. Amid this chaos was Kale Darrow, a hardened human mercenary with a reputation that made him both revered and feared. For 10 years, Kale had navigated the dangerous currents of interstellar politics and warfare, fighting not for ideology but survival. He had no allegiance to the Vrandari or their dynastic squabbles. His loyalty was to his crew, his ship, and the credits that kept them afloat. Kale's ship, the Iron Horizon, was docked miles from the conflict zone, hidden beneath the jagged cliffs of Zelfa Ridge. It was here that Kale found himself reluctantly thrust into the service of the Zalith dynasty, one of the most powerful Vrandari clans. Their prince, Prince Rakthar, had hired Kale's crew for a desperate mission: to reclaim a crucial supply depot seized by the rival Irithan coalition. The mission was supposed to be simple: strike fast, retrieve the supplies, and retreat. But like most things on Vrander 7, it quickly devolved into a nightmare. A fight for survival. Kale crouched behind a crumbling wall, his pulse rifle humming faintly in his hands. The sound of explosions and the sharp crack of laser fire filled the air, mingling with the guttural cries of dying soldiers. The Irithan forces had entrenched themselves in the depot, their superior numbers overwhelming the Zalith troops. "Boss, we're getting pinned down here," came the voice of Jax, Kale's second-in-command, over the comms. His tone was laced with panic. "These guys have some serious firepower. We need to fall back." Kale cursed under his breath, peering through the smoke to survey the battlefield. The Zalith troops were scattered, their defensive lines collapsing. In the center of it all was Prince Rakthar, his golden armor tarnished with soot as he shouted orders to his soldiers. "If we fall back, Rakthar's toast," Kale muttered. "And if he dies, we don't get paid." Jax's reply crackled over the comms. "You're seriously risking our necks for this guy? He's already lost the fight." Kale glanced at Rakthar again, a grim determination settling in his chest. "We're mercenaries, Jax. We don't leave jobs half-finished." Before Jax could protest further, Kale activated his comlink to the rest of the crew. "Team Bravo, flank the eastern side and draw their fire. Jax, cover the prince. I'm going in." Kale vaulted over the wall, sprinting through the chaos with practiced precision. His pulse rifle barked with deadly efficiency, each shot finding its mark as he carved a path toward the prince. The rescue. Rakthar was cornered, his back to a supply crate as Irithan soldiers closed in. His energy blade flickered weakly, its charge nearly depleted. Blood trickled from a wound on his forehead, and his breaths came in ragged gasps. "Hold on, Your Highness," Kale shouted, his rifle cutting down 2 soldiers in quick succession. Rakthar's eyes widened as Kale slid into cover beside him. You came back?" "Don't sound so surprised," Kale replied, reloading his rifle. "We're not done yet." The two fought side by side, Kale's relentless precision complementing Rakthar's desperate swings. Despite their odds, the tide began to turn. Kale's crew managed to draw the enemy's attention, giving the Zalith troops a chance to regroup. Within minutes, the depot was retaken. The remaining Irithan forces retreated, their morale shattered. Kale slumped against a crate, his chest heaving as he surveyed the carnage. Rakthar approached him, his golden armor dented but still gleaming. "You've done a great service to the Zalith dynasty today, human. I owe you my life." Kale wiped the sweat from his brow, his tone weary. "Yeah, well, let's just hope your credits are worth all this trouble." An unusual offer. The victory at Zelfa Ridge secured the Zalith dynasty's foothold on Vrander 7, and Kale's crew was rewarded handsomely for their efforts. But as Kale prepared to leave the war-torn planet behind, Rakthar summoned him for a private meeting. The prince's tent was lavishly adorned, a stark contrast to the grim battlefield outside. Rakthar sat on a throne-like chair, his golden eyes studying Kale intently. "You've proven yourself more than just a mercenary, Kale Darrow," Rakthar said. You are a warrior of great honor. Kale shifted uncomfortably. I appreciate the sentiment, Your Highness, but I'm just here for the job. Rakthar smiled faintly. And yet, you saved my life when you could have abandoned me. That is not the act of a man motivated purely by profit. Kale shrugged. Let's just say I don't like loose ends. Rakthar rose from his chair, his expression thoughtful. Among my people, a life debt is not taken lightly. I must repay you in a way that honors our traditions. Kale raised an eyebrow. I thought the payment we agreed on was enough. Rakthar's smile widened. It is not about payment. It is about gratitude. And so, I offer you a gift-a companion who will serve you for the rest of her life. Kale's brow furrowed as Rakthar clapped his hands. A moment later, a tall, cloaked figure entered the tent. As the figure stepped into the light, Kale's eyes widened in disbelief. The woman before him was unmistakably Vrandari, her elongated features and shimmering skin marking her as one of Rakthar's people. But unlike the elegant and graceful Vrandari he had encountered before, this woman's appearance was strikingly unconventional. Her skin was mottled with irregular patches of color, and her frame was lanky and awkward. She looked at Kale with a mix of defiance and uncertainty. This is my sister, Princess Velka, Rakthar said proudly. She will be your servant and protector, a token of my eternal gratitude. Kale stared at Rakthar, then at Velka, struggling to process what had just happened. You're giving me your sister? Rakthar nodded, his expression earnest. She is strong, loyal, and without equal in combat. She will serve you well. Kale glanced at Velka, who crossed her arms and raised an eyebrow. Well, human, she said, her voice sharp. Do you accept? Kale sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. I think I just got a lot more than I bargained for. Chapter 2. A gift with strings attached. A rough start. Kale Darrow stood in the Zalith dynasty's ornate tent, staring at Princess Velka, whose defiant posture made it clear she wasn't thrilled with the arrangement either. Her mismatched skin patterns and ungraceful frame were starkly different from the refined beauty typically associated with the Vrandari, but it was her piercing gaze that unnerved Kale the most. It wasn't the look of someone who saw herself as property. It was the look of someone daring him to try and treat her like it. Well? Velka asked, her sharp voice cutting through the silence. Are you going to accept this arrangement, or stand there gawking all day? Kale rubbed his temples. This isn't exactly something I prepared for when I signed up to fight your war. Rakthar, standing tall and proud beside his sister, clapped a hand on Kale's shoulder. Velka may not meet the traditional standards of beauty, but she is a fierce warrior and loyal to her core. She will serve you well, I assure you. Kale glanced at Rakthar, then back at Velka, who still looked like she wanted to punch someone. Look, Kale said, choosing his words carefully, I appreciate the gesture, but I'm not exactly the gifted companion type. Maybe Dash. You would insult my honor by rejecting her? Rakthar interrupted, his tone sharp. The prince's golden eyes narrowed, and Kale realized just how serious this was. Among the Vrandari, rejecting a gift tied to a life debt was considered a grave insult, one that could spark blood feuds or even wars. Kale sighed. All right, fine. I'll take her with me. Rakthar beamed, completely ignoring the irritated glare Velka shot at him. Excellent. You'll see, Captain Darrow. My sister will prove to be an invaluable ally. Kale wasn't so sure. The departure. Hours later, Kale stood in the Iron Horizon's cargo bay, watching as Velka surveyed the ship with a critical eye. The freighter was old and battered, its interior a patchwork of repairs and modifications. To Kale, it was home. To Velka, it was clearly a disappointment. This is your ship? She asked, wrinkling her nose. I expected something grander. Kale crossed his arms. It's not fancy, but it gets the job done. Velka smirked, a hint of amusement in her expression. Let's hope it holds together long enough to get us out of Vrandari space. Kale resisted the urge to snap back. Instead, he motioned for her to follow him to the crew quarters. Come on, I'll show you where you'll be staying. The crew quarters were small and utilitarian, with narrow bunks and lockers lining the walls. Velka raised an eyebrow as she inspected the space. Cramped, noisy, and smells like engine grease. Lovely. Welcome to mercenary life, Kale replied dryly. It's not all royal palaces and gilded armor. She turned to face him, her expression serious. Let's get one thing straight, human. I'm not here to be pampered or coddled. If you think I'll sit around while you and your crew do all the work, you're mistaken. Kale blinked, caught off guard by her bluntness. I didn't think that, actually. Good, she said, her tone firm. Because I intend to earn my place on this ship. Kale couldn't help but smirk. All right, princess. Let's see what you've got. First impressions. It didn't take long for Velka to make her presence felt aboard the Iron Horizon. She was a skilled fighter, her combat training evident as she sparred with Kale's crew during downtime. Even Jax, who was usually quick to criticize, grudgingly admitted she had talent. She's got a mean right hook, Jax said one evening, nursing a bruised arm. Didn't expect that from someone who looks like she's all elbows and knees. Kale chuckled. She's full of surprises. Velka, overhearing the comment, smirked as she walked past. Careful, human. Compliments might make me think you're starting to like me. Kale rolled his eyes but couldn't deny she was growing on him. Her sharp wit and no-nonsense attitude were a refreshing change from the sycophants and opportunists he usually dealt with. Trouble on the horizon. Their fragile camaraderie was tested when the Iron Horizon intercepted a distress signal from a nearby asteroid field. The signal came from a freighter under attack by unknown ships, its crew pleading for help. We should help them, Velka said immediately, her tone resolute. Kale hesitated. It could be a trap. Pirates love setting up fake distress signals. Or it could be innocent people in danger, she countered. Isn't that what mercenaries are supposed to do? Protect those who can't protect themselves? Jack scoffed. Mercenaries protect their contracts, not random strangers. Velka glared at him. Then maybe it's time you learned what real honor looks like. Kale held up a hand, silencing the argument. We'll check it out, but we're not taking unnecessary risks. Jax, prepare the weapons. Velka, you're with me. The trap. As the Iron Horizon approached the source of the distress signal, Kale's instincts screamed that something was off. The freighter drifted aimlessly among the asteroids, its lights flickering. No response came from their hails. This feels wrong, Kale muttered, his hand hovering over the weapons console. Before he could make a decision, several ships uncloaked from behind the asteroids, their weapons locking onto the Iron Horizon. Ambush! Jack shouted over the comms. The pirate ships opened fire, plasma bolts striking the freighter's shields. Kale gritted his teeth as he maneuvered the ship through the asteroid field, dodging incoming fire. Velka stood at the weapons console, her movements swift and precise, targeting the lead ship. Firing now. The Iron Horizon's cannons roared, tearing through the enemy ship's hull. The explosion lit up the asteroid field, but more ships swarmed in to take its place. We're outnumbered, Jax yelled. We need to retreat. No, Velka said firmly. We fight. Kale glanced at her, seeing the fire in her eyes. All right, princess. Let's show them what we're made of. A new ally. The battle was fierce, but Velka's combat instincts and Kale's piloting skills turned the tide. Together, they destroyed several pirate ships and forced the rest to retreat. The freighter they had come to save was damaged but intact, its grateful crew sending a message of thanks. As the Iron Horizon limped away from the battlefield, Kale turned to Velka. You were right. Helping them was the right call. Velka smirked. Told you. Maybe there's hope for you humans after all. Kale chuckled. And maybe you're not so bad yourself. For the first time, Velka smiled a genuine, unguarded expression that softened her sharp features. Don't get used to it, Captain. Chapter 3. A Growing Bond. After the battle, the Iron Horizon drifted through the quiet void of space, its engines humming softly as the crew worked to repair the damage from the ambush. In the aftermath of the battle, the atmosphere aboard the ship was tense but hopeful. The crew couldn't deny that Velka had played a key role in their survival, even if some of them were reluctant to admit it. Kale stood in the engineering bay, surveying the scorched wires and damaged panels. His second-in-command, Jax, leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. She's not bad, Jax admitted grudgingly, but that doesn't mean I trust her. Kale raised an eyebrow. You're still holding a grudge? She's a royal, Kale, Jax said, his voice low. They don't think like us. They don't care about the little people. Kale sighed, running a hand through his hair. She put her life on the line for us out there. That counts for something. Jack snorted. We'll see how long it lasts. As Jax walked away, Kale turned his attention back to the repairs. But his thoughts lingered on Velka. Despite her rough edges and royal lineage, there was something about her that intrigued him, something he couldn't quite put into words. Velka's worth. In the training room, Velka sparred with one of the crew, a burly man named Garen who towered over her. Garen was known for his brute strength, and the rest of the crew gathered to watch, expecting Velka to be easily overpowered. But Velka moved with a speed and precision that left Garen struggling to keep up. She ducked under his swings, her strikes landing with pinpoint accuracy. Within minutes, she had him pinned to the ground, his massive frame immobilized by her surprisingly strong grip. "Yield," she said, her voice calm but firm. Garen groaned. "Fine, I yield." The crew murmured in surprise, their skepticism beginning to waver. Velka released Garen and stood, her expression unreadable as she met their gazes. "Anyone else?" she asked. The room fell silent. Kale, who had been watching from the doorway, smirked. "Not bad, princess. You're full of surprises." Velka turned to him, raising an eyebrow. "Did you think I wouldn't be capable?" "I didn't doubt you," Kale said, "but I think you just earned their respect." "Good," Velka replied. "I'm not here to sit on the sidelines." A cryptic warning. Later that evening, Kale and Velka sat in the cockpit, watching the stars streak past as the ship traveled through hyperspace. The silence between them was comfortable, the tension from their earlier interactions beginning to fade. "Why did you decide to fight with us?" Kale asked, breaking the silence. "You could have stayed behind with your brother." Velka's gaze remained fixed on the stars. "Because I needed to prove to myself that I could be more than what people see. I'm not just an ugly princess or a burden. I want to stand on my own." Kale nodded, understanding more than he let on. "Well, you've proven that. To me and the crew." Velka glanced at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you." Their moment was interrupted by an incoming transmission. Kale activated the comms, and a distorted voice filled the cockpit. "Captain Darrow," the voice said, "you have something we want." Kale frowned. "Who is this?" "Your new companion is more valuable than you realize," the voice continued. "Hand her over, and we'll let you live." Velka stiffened, her hand instinctively going to the blade at her side. "They're after me," she said quietly. Kale narrowed his eyes. "Who are they?" "The Erethan Coalition," Velka replied. "My brother's enemies. They must have learned about me joining your crew." Kale clenched his jaw, anger flaring in his chest. "They're not taking you." The transmission ended abruptly, and the ship's proximity alarms blared. A fleet of Erethan fighters emerged from hyperspace, their weapons locking onto the iron horizon. The ambush. Kale sprinted to the bridge, Velka close behind him. Jax was already at the controls, barking orders to the crew as the fighters closed in. "Looks like they brought a small army," Jax said grimly. "What's the plan, boss?" Kale took the captain's seat, his mind racing. "We can't fight them head-on. Set a course for the Nebula field. We'll lose them in the interference." The iron horizon veered sharply, its engines roaring as it accelerated toward the dense, glowing clouds of the nebula. The Erethan fighters gave chase, their plasma cannons firing relentlessly. In the turret room, Velka manned one of the ship's cannons, her sharp reflexes allowing her to pick off pursuing fighters with ease. "I've got 2 down," she reported. "But there's more coming." Kale's voice came over the comms. "Keep them off us as long as you can. We're almost to the nebula." The ship entered the swirling clouds of the nebula, its systems flickering as the electromagnetic interference scrambled their sensors. The Erethan fighters hesitated, their movements less coordinated as they struggled to navigate the hazardous terrain. "Now's our chance," Kale said. "Activate the decoy drones." Jax hit a switch, releasing a swarm of drones that mimicked the Iron Horizon signature. The Erethan fighters split up, chasing the decoys and leaving the real ship undetected. Revelations. Once they were safely out of the nebula, Kale gathered the crew in the common area. Velka stood beside him, her expression serious. "They're not going to stop," Kale said, addressing the crew. "The Erethans are after Velka, and as long as she's with us, we're a target. Some of the crew murmured uneasily, but Velka stepped forward, her voice steady. I didn't ask for this, but I won't run away. If you want me to leave, I will. But if you let me stay, I promise to fight for this crew with everything I have. The room fell silent. Then Jax, after a long pause, sighed. Well, she did save our asses back there. I guess she can stick around for now. Velka smirked. I'll take that as a compliment. Kale smiled, a sense of relief washing over him. All right, princess. Looks like you're officially one of us. As the crew dispersed, Velka turned to Kale. Thank you for believing in me. Kale met her gaze, his voice soft. We've all got something to prove. You're not alone. Chapter 4. The Final Stand. An uneasy calm. The iron horizon floated in a hidden corner of the nebula, cloaked in swirling clouds of electromagnetic interference. The crew was busy repairing the ship and preparing for the inevitable return of the Earthen coalition, who would stop at nothing to capture Princess Velka. Kale stood in the bridge, his arms crossed as he stared out at the nebula's eerie glow. Velka entered silently, her presence commanding despite her unconventional appearance. Her mismatched features seemed to soften in the dim light, and Kale couldn't help but notice how much she had changed since joining the crew. You've been quiet, Velka said, breaking the silence. Kale glanced at her. Just thinking. The Irithans won't give up easily. We're going to have to face them eventually. Velka nodded, her expression resolute. Then we face them. Together. Kale smirked. You're starting to sound like a mercenary. She raised an eyebrow. Maybe you're rubbing off on me. The Irithan trap. The peace didn't last long. Within hours, the ship's sensors detected a disturbance at the edge of the nebula. The Irithans were back, and this time, they weren't taking any chances. A massive command cruiser led their fleet, its weapons bristling with firepower. They brought a cruiser? Jax exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. What the hell are we supposed to do against that? We outthink them, Kale said firmly. They're expecting us to run. Let's give them something else. He turned to Velka. You said you wanted to fight for this crew. Are you ready? Velka's mismatched eyes gleamed with determination. Always. Kale outlined his plan. The Iron Horizon would use the nebula's interference to its advantage, luring the Irithan ships into an ambush. Velka would lead a small team to infiltrate the command cruiser and disable its systems from within. You trust me to lead the team? Velka asked, surprised. You've proven yourself more than capable, Kale replied. And besides, you've got the most to gain or lose from this. Velka smiled faintly. Then let's make it count. The infiltration. The infiltration team Velka, Kale, and 2 other crew members boarded a small, stealthy shuttle and approached the Irithan command cruiser under the cover of the nebula. The ship's massive hull loomed ahead, its surface bristling with weapons and sensor arrays. Velka's voice was steady as she gave orders. Once we're inside, head for the engineering deck. If we can disable their power core, they'll be sitting ducks. The shuttle latched onto the cruiser's outer hull, and the team breached the airlock with precision. Inside, the ship was eerily quiet, its corridors lit by dim, flickering lights. The Irithan soldiers were focused on the battle outside, giving the infiltration team a narrow window of opportunity. As they moved through the ship, Velka's combat training shone. She took down guards with silent efficiency, her movements graceful and precise. Kale couldn't help but admire her skill. You're a natural at this, he whispered. Velka smirked. Told you I'm not just a royal. The power core. The team reached the engineering deck, where the cruiser's massive power core hummed with energy. Velka studied the controls, her sharp mind quickly deciphering the alien interface. Can you disable it? Kale asked. Velka nodded. I can overload it, but we'll need to move fast. It'll trigger a chain reaction. Kale activated his comms. Jax, we're almost ready. Get the horizon clear of the blast zone. Copy that, Jax replied. Don't take too long, Captain. Velka worked quickly, her fingers flying over the controls. Alarms began blaring as the system detected the sabotage. The team fought off waves of Irithan soldiers, holding their ground as Velka completed her work. It's done, she shouted. We've got 5 minutes to get out of here. The team sprinted back to the shuttle, the ship shaking as the power core began to destabilize. They barely made it out before the first explosion rocked the cruiser, sending debris spiraling into the nebula. The turning point. With their command cruiser destroyed, the Erethan fleet was thrown into chaos. The Iron Horizon, now clear of the nebula, turned its weapons on the remaining ships. Kale and Velka coordinated the assault, their teamwork seamless. The battle ended in victory, the Erethan fleet retreating with what little remained of their forces. Cheers erupted aboard the Iron Horizon as the crew celebrated their hard-fought win. A new beginning. In the aftermath of the battle, Kale and Velka stood in the ship's lounge, the faint hum of the engines a comforting backdrop. The crew's respect for Velka was evident in their smiles and nods as they passed, a far cry from the skepticism she had faced when she first arrived. "You proved them wrong," Kale said, handing her a glass of something strong. "You proved all of us wrong." Velka took the glass, her mismatched eyes meeting his. "I didn't do it to prove anything. I did it because it was right." Kale smiled. "You're one of us now, Velka. You always were." She raised her glass in a toast. "To new beginnings." "To new beginnings," Kale echoed, clinking his glass against hers. As the ship drifted through the stars, Velka felt a sense of belonging she had never known. She wasn't just a princess or an outcast anymore, she was part of a family. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free.